welcome to our first EYTC Club webcast today. We trust that you're all doing well and that you managed to get used to the current exceptional circumstances. We will try today to run our session like we normally do our EYTC Club sessions in the EY offices. We just do it today via our PCs and laptops. You will have our slide on your screen, and you can also ask questions like in the office by using the question and answers section on the right hand side of your screen on the top. The questions will have to be in writing. The voice function, by the way, of your laptop is automatically disabled. So while we are waiting for another few moments to allow other participants to join, let me introduce the panel that will help me to guide you through the presentation of today. We have my right here, Yannick Zeipen, who is our indirect tax leader and will cover today the VAT aspects. We have Giuseppe Tuzzi, who is our expert for grants and incentives and will help me to cover the corporate tax matters today. We have Stephen Derico, who is the leader of our corporate and regulatory practice at EY. And last but not least, we have Sylvie Like, who leads our people advisory services at EY and will cover today personal tax and social security. So while we have allowed a couple of minutes for all people to join, I propose that we get started. So next to obviously all the health and medical implication of the current COVID-19 crisis, it is really of utmost importance that we keep the economy going and that we ensure that our companies survive the current crisis and the businesses continue to employ their people, preserve employment. That is precisely also the goal why the Luxembourg government has put a huge help package, support package into place. It totals quite impressive amount of 8.8 billion of economic support. And today we will open that package, so to say, and explore its content in more detail. You can see on your screen the various areas that the package covers. So basically, that's the goals that the government wants to achieve. And for instance, here we have the meeting of the company's short-term liquidity needs. We have facilitation of bank financing. We have obviously also, as I said, job retention, promotion of teleworking, etc. And on the right side here, you can see a list of government bodies that are involved into the package, where not surprisingly, you find the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Finance, but you also find the SNCE, the National Luxembourg Credit and Investment Company, and of course also, among others, the direct and the indirect tax authority. On the next page here, you can see a very nice and complete overview of all the measures that we have tried to classify into different categories. And you can see for all the measures, the details here in the different categories. Like, for example, in bank financing, we have state guarantees for new loans that company would take up. For the liquidity needs, we have cash grants, we have VAT refunds, for example, and so on. So you can see the measures and you would find back here the measures that I mentioned at the beginning: job retention, teleworking, etc. So that's all the measures that we want to explore today, and I'm happy to guide you through these measures together with my colleagues. To start with, let's take a look at the facilitation of the bank financing, which is certainly one of the important measures, obviously, since, especially at this time, it's important for companies to stay liquid and to be able to pay their expenses, where on the other side, there's a shortage or a severe drop in revenues. And you can see on these slides how we are trying to show you in the various categories, first, who can benefit from the measure and what is the measure generally about. In addition, on the slides, we'll not go into too much detail on that, but you can see how actually to benefit from the measure and what really to do in practice in order to obtain access to. So on the state-backed guarantees for new bank loans, in essence, it's really commercial and industrial companies that are authorized to do business in Luxembourg that benefit. In addition, it's liberal professions, whether a person or legal entity. And important to know that excluded are, in principle here, real estate companies and also holding companies. Companies that were already in difficulty before 1st of January this year are also excluded because their difficulties will not be related to the current COVID-19. And what is it now? What does it really cover, that guarantee? Well, it is for loans with a maximum maturity of 6 years that would be granted by credit institutions, by banks, between basically now or say mid-March to end of December this year, to companies that are in difficulties due to the current COVID-19 crisis. And the state guarantee for this loan can go up to 85%. And the maximum of the amount of the loan is 25% of the 2019 turnover of the company. In absence of a turnover for 2019, it will be 28. The next measure is a special anti-crisis financing. So that's real financing, although indirect via SNCI, but involving the company's banks. Eligible basically are Luxembourg small and medium-sized businesses and also large companies that operate in Luxembourg. And the financing, as I said, is indirect via the company's usual bank, so the company's house bank. And if that bank agrees to finance 40% of the amount, then the national credit company, the SNCI, agrees to finance 60% of the amount. As such, can vary between 12,500 euros up to 10 million euros, so quite significant. And the maximum duration is, in principle, 5 years, and the repayment of capital can be delayed for the first 2 years. So that being the first two finance measures, my colleague Giuseppe will now guide you through the short-term liquidity needs.
Hello. Yes, many thanks, Mark. Yes, the second topics which we are covering are the short-term liquidity needs aids. And the first aid has been recently voted at the Chamber of Deputies is the reimbursable cash grant, which is applicable to basically all companies, being a small enterprise, medium-sized, micro-enterprise, or larger company. And as well, self-employed individuals are also covered by the measure, and by self-employed activity, basically the law is also referring to the tax law. It includes, among others, lawyers, doctors, architects, and so on. There are several conditions linked to that measure. Basically, there are 4 conditions. The first condition is basically that there should be an unforeseeable event linked to the measure. And by unforeseeable event, it is meant it includes COVID-19 crisis, and also the company should face temporary financial problems due to the crisis. And also the company needs to have a current activity before the event, meaning it should have already been carrying out an activity. And what does it cover as such? The measure covers the reimbursable grant. As the name said, it basically the company has to, or the taxpayer has to reimburse the grant at some point of time. The aid is capped to an amount of 50% of the admissible eligible expenses and cannot exceed an amount of 500,000 euros. By eligible expenses, it is meant the personal expenses, staff costs, and also related staff costs, and also rental expenses. And in the frame of the rental expenses, there is also a cap of 10,000 euro per month. And also there is a time limit expenses, those expenses which are incurred from 15th of March to 15th of May 2020. We basically 2 months. But it's also possible that they extend it at some point of time if the crisis also lasts more than 1 period mentioned here. The aid is also reimbursed at the earliest 12 months after the cash grant has been paid, meaning you have at least 12 months time, and then you have to negotiate with the Ministry of Economy just to pay to the payments delay or the reimbursement plan. The application has also to be filed. You see the link. The application has to be filed in a specific form, which is also available on the Vichy Public website. The second measure is also a cash grant, but this is a non-reimbursable cash grant, meaning it's a final grant. But the measure is, however, limited to very small businesses and to self-employed individuals. There are also some conditions, at least first on the eligible enterprises and self-employed persons. It should at least have a valid business license and not employing more than 9 persons full-time position. And also the companies and self-employed persons are covered are those which were obliged to stop their activity. For example, if the business has to stop their activity, of course, these are covered. And also there's a minimal amount of turnover which the company or the self-employed activity has. The slides are moving faster. Sorry, thank you. And also on the amount itself, very limited, 5,000 euros. It's not that much, but at least it can help small business meet short-term liquidity. The same topics also for the short-term liquidity needs. The state government has also announced an agreement which has been reached with the major retail banks in Luxembourg. Banks are listed there. I don't need to repeat them. And here, the measure covers basically self-employed persons, individuals, SMEs, and larger companies. And the idea is here to postpone the repayment of the loans in order to meet the temporary cash flow difficulties. There's a postponement of payment of the loan. There are currently no exact details available. It is just an announcement which has been posted on the website of the ministry, but at least a measure which will perhaps be more formalized there. A similar measure has also been announced by the SNC, which is the Société Nationale. Also concerns exclusively concern existing loans, which have been granted by the SNC to SMEs or to larger companies. And here also the idea is to postpone the repayment of the principal amount for maturities 31 of May 2020 and 30. And also there is an automatic extension also of loans, maturity of loans for 6 months. There's nothing to do. They will do it automatically. And also on that same topic, which are also moratorium, which is also an aid aiming to meet the short-term liquidities, is also the announcement by the Luxembourg state and also certain municipalities like the state, the Luxembourg City and municipality of Ash, which also decided to suspend the payment of the rents for buildings where they are owned. I think that's the turn of Sylvie, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, thank you, Giuseppe. This is Sylvie speaking. I will go through first the elements of liquidity that relate to HR consideration. So the first item that has been put in place to facilitate cash management of companies is an advance of the payment of or the reimbursement of extraordinary family leave in the current circumstances. I will go into the details of this leave in a minute. But basically, the Social Security authorities have already reached out to employers to ask them some information that will allow them to get already an advance on the reimbursement they should normally receive mid of May. So that process has been initiated already, and employers are in a position to actually provide that information that will allow them to get the advance paid by mid of next week. That's the first element. The second element is on the short-time work due to force majeure, so the chômage partiel, that has been developed in this context, whereby here also the government has put in place a procedure whereby employers can get access to an early reimbursement, an advance on what they will have to pay to their employees who are on these short-time work arrangements. And I will go through the paying process in a minute. But there again, it's with the objective to facilitate cash management. So for both items, which are very important, there is an advance process which has been put in place. In addition to that, on Friday last week, a new measure was adopted whereby the Social Security authorities will directly pay employees who are on sick leave. You may know that in general the employer is obliged to continue paying the salary of an employee who is on sick leave until the end of the month during which the 77th day of sickness occurs. Given the current circumstances, the Social Security authorities will directly take that in charge. In the general principle, the employer continues paying the remuneration and is being reimbursed 80% by the Mutualité des Employeurs. With this process, the Social Security authorities will directly pay so that there is no need to pre-finance for the employer and there is no remaining 20% cost for the employer. That measure starts effective 1st of April 2020 until the end of the month in which the state of crisis occurs, so for the time being until the end of June. Another element that was adopted in this context is that employers have to still pay their Social Security contributions, the employer part, and pass over to the Social Security authorities the employees part. The deadlines remain the same as what they normally are. However, the government has put in place measures whereby they will not apply any fines, no penalties, nor enforced collection of contributions for employers who would not be in a position to pay their contributions immediately. So there is more flexibility for employers in the payment of their Social Security contributions. This will not give rise to penalties or fines or anything of that nature if they pay later than what they would normally have to do. I will now hand over to Yannick Zeipan, who will walk you through the equivalent measures that have been put in place from a VAT perspective.
Thank you, Sylvie. In order to answer short-term liquidity needs, the VAT administration is refunding VAT receivables up to 10,000. This is an automatic measure, but it is limited to self-employed and SMEs. In terms of deferment of tax-related payments, two measures from the indirect tax administration. The first is a tolerance on the filing deadline, so they will not assess penalties in case of late filing of any returns which are due them. It is also an automatic measure, no action has to be taken. And this measure applies to all persons which are due to file returns with the indirect tax administration. Tolerance in terms of filing doesn't necessarily mean a tolerance in terms of payment. So no later than yesterday, the VAT administration has issued a communication saying that they will grant deferral of VAT payments to persons which are facing financial difficulties due to the current crisis. There is a specific form to request such a deferral, which is available on myguichet.lu, where the taxable person has to explain why it is facing such difficulties. This is a quite straightforward form to be completed, and this measure applies to all VAT registered persons. With this, back to Mark. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Yannick. Still on the deferral of tax-related payments, we have first of all the deferral of the income tax return filing, where the deadline is now set to the 30th of June 2020 and basically applies to all taxpayers, corporate and individuals. Now, to the extent that there was quite a tolerance already for the filing of income tax returns, I think that measure is probably in many cases rather theoretical. What is already of more relevance, I think, is that the tax advance payments for the first 2 quarters of 2020 can actually be cancelled or reduced. I think that can be a very effective measure for any taxpayers that pay income tax and municipal business tax. To be noted here that net worth tax is actually not included. And the consequence is that this cancellation or reduction will be done without any. And another measure that actually is not directly linked to the COVID-19 crisis, but that is available in general, is a deferral of 4 months of the payment of tax installments, also without any interest. Generally, this is also granted automatically. In this case, it's for corporate income tax, municipal business tax, and net worth tax actually is included. So this is not for private individuals, but rather for self-employed, small and medium-sized companies, and also for large companies. Then we have a number of deadlines in tax measures that are adapted to the situation. The first one is the option for the final 20% taxation on interest, where the request for 2019 is now extended to 2020, and that is a measure that is for resident individual taxpayers. And also, if you want to liquidate with tax authorities, you have more time now, because if you want to file a claim in front of the court, there's a suspension of the deadline until 30th of June 2020. And also, if you want to file a complaint in front of the tax director, it's the same deadline, which means that the usual deadline of 3 months only starts to run after the deadline here of 30th of June is reached. And that is a measure that is applicable to all taxpayers, be it private individuals. And then we have 2 measures that are basically in counterpart to the benefit of the state, namely an extension of statute of limitation for tax claims that the state may have against taxpayers, and that would normally now expire on 31st of December 2020. Those claims are extended until 31st of December 2021. And the same if there's a claim within in international context, bilateral or multilateral, based on a bilateral or multilateral agreement, it would be the same. And also state privileges or guarantees that may exist and that would otherwise expire by 31st of December 2020 are now extended to 31st of December 2020. And I hand back over to Sylvie for more tax-related topics, right, Sylvie?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Indeed, we will now discuss what measures have been put in place in relation to employment, protecting employment, as you said at the beginning, plus addressing some specific requirements. So the first item relates to the situation of cross-border workers. As you all know, Luxembourg has a huge amount of employees working in the country that actually do not reside in the country, and many of them are actually working from home in the current circumstances. As a general principle, these people are only taxable on their salary in Luxembourg if they physically work on the Luxembourg territory, subject to certain de minimis provision. So if they do not work outside of Luxembourg, being from home, business travel, whatever, for more than a certain amount of days, they still remain 100% taxable in Luxembourg. This amount of days depends on the country. 19 days for German residents, 24 days for Belgian residents, 29 days since this year for French residents. Now, in the current situation with increased home working activity, of course, this became a very important topic, and Luxembourg managed to agree with all 3 neighboring countries that the home working linked to the current situation will actually not impact the threshold that is applicable to the respective countries. So This will apply starting from 11th of March for German residents and since 14th of March for Belgian and French residents. In addition to that, from a social security perspective, an employee is in principle subject to the social security scheme of the country where the employer is located, unless that person works for more than 25% of his or her time in the country of residence. Here again, due to increased home working activity, this threshold could be exceeded, and here again, Luxembourg plus the neighboring countries, confirmed by the EU Commission, consider that increased home working due to the crisis should not be considered for the purpose of this 25% threshold. So all very reassuring to Luxembourg employers and all of these commuters that cross the border every day. Well, less those days. The other measure that was put in place, which I mentioned quickly before in terms of advance, is the short-time work, chômage partiel, for laughing for English native speakers maybe, whereby Luxembourg companies can use this measure to actually, if they suffer reduction of activity given the circumstances, they can put their employees on that chômage partiel procedure. This is an automatic approval for all those companies which were forced to close, restaurants, hairdresser, whatever that can be. And there is an approval process which is undertaken at the level of the Comité de Conjoncture for all the other companies. Under these circumstances, the employees at stake will receive an allowance which is 80% of their salary, and that will be reimbursed by the state to the employer, subject to a certain ceiling, which is 2.5 times the minimum salary. That is more or less 5,300 euro. This can be also flexible. It does not need to be on a full-time basis. It can be on a part-time basis. It is really allowing employers to flex as need be based on the need for their people. What is also important to notice is that for employees who would be on trial period and who would go on this short-time work program, well, the trial period will be suspended until the end of the state of crisis, so for the time being until the end of June. Another measure that was put in place is the extraordinary leave for family reasons for employees. So for those employees who would have work, not who lack work, because then they should go on the short-time work arrangement, but who would have work and are unable to perform it because they have to take care of their children, well, they can obtain a specific extraordinary family leave whereby they will remain paid as if they work, and their employer will be reimbursed 100% of their salary, subject to the social security ceiling. For the two last measures, as I mentioned before, there is a prepayment and advance which is available for the employer so that they do not have too much of a cash flow issue in continuing paying their people either on the extraordinary family leave or on the short-time work. I will now hand over to Giuseppe, who will guide you through some other measures.
Many thanks, Sylvie. Also, as measure, as Mark introduced in the agenda, there are also measures which are more sector-specific measures. One of the first measure is which is intended to enhance the Luxembourg export businesses and the international development. Who is concerned is basically all Luxembourg exporting businesses. It includes larger companies, SMEs, and also certain self-employed activities. There are several measures included in the aid, which are as follows. First one is the increase in the guaranteed percentage of the limits contracts which are issued during the state of crisis within the framework of the export insurance. Another measure is also an enhanced collaboration with the mutualité de cautionnement, which allows basically the mutualité to increase its capacity, insurance capacity. Another measure includes the bank credit insurance product. Which enables basically the banks to reduce their risk on non-repayment of the loans which are granted to Luxembourg exporters. And also here the scope, the definition of eligible bank loans will also be broadened in order to include more loans than it was in the past. The measure includes also an increase of the insurance percentage under the bank guarantee insurance product, in order also for the bank to guarantee the credit line granted by the bank. The measure also includes the reduction of time limit for processing the claim. This is quite useful in order to get quite a rapid repayment of the claim, meaning reducing delays. And also the other last measure includes also the reduction of the time limit for reimbursement of invoices which are paid within the financial aid activity. And here the measure is should be addressed to the Office du Droit, which is the Luxembourg public agency for designed to support Luxembourg exporters. There are no specific modalities explained, but I think the request should be filed with the Office du Droit and they will explain everything. The other specific measure concerns which has been recently announced, I think 2 days ago, yesterday, I think, if I'm not wrong. The measure announced by the Minister of the Economy to companies which are reorienting their production to produce masks and hydroalcoholic gel. These are, as you know, goods which are really needed during the health crisis, and Ministry of Economy through the Middle Class Directorate decided just to also grant an aid also to those companies who are producing those goods. And the idea here is to finance 100% of the investment costs linked to the reorientation of the production to produce those assets, those goods. And here the contact is here the General Directorate for Middle Class. And also in that same topic, in same aid, the Ministry also announced that they will broaden also the scope of the existing aid for SMEs by including also investments which are made by companies to infrastructure for allowing teletravail or teleworking, and also in order to allow also putting in place hygiene products in order for companies to keep basically people safer. And also here the idea is also to cover the costs of investment for such infrastructure and hygiene products. They also make a reference, perhaps good to know, that they are also making a reference to the current de minimis aid scheme. I don't know if you know the scheme, it's also recently voted, in December, I think, but there's a current limit of 200,000 euros for SMEs. I don't know now if they will expand the amount. I don't think so, because the amount is fixed by the EU regulation, but at least good to know that the cap is 200,000 euros. I think the next topic should be covered by Stefan.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you. So I will cover 3 legal topics in the next minutes. Let's start with a suspension of deadlines relating to jurisdictional proceedings. As per the provisions of the Grand Ducal Regulation of March 25th, all deadlines prescribed in proceedings before the civil, commercial, criminal, and administrative courts are suspended, meaning they're frozen and postponed until the end of the current state of emergency we're in, which is for now until the end of June. So more precisely, this is about any instance deadlines within which the parties have to lodge a complaint or an appeal, any deadlines relating to property seizures and forced sales, any evictions relating to leases or opening of bankruptcies. Second topic now, the postponement of certain filing deadlines. So in this respect, a draft legislation is in the process of discussion and should be voted by Parliament by the end of April, and derives from the fact that many service providers or in-house services, such as CFOs, would be late in rendering the various services companies need from them by the legal deadline. So this is in particular about 2 points. The point number one is the postponement by 3 months of the filing and publication of annual and consolidated accounts for companies in general. For instance, for a company closing on December 31st, instead of filing its accounts on July 31st, its filing obligation would be postponed to October 31st. This would also mean in practice that companies closing on December 31st would have until September 30 to hold an annual general shareholders meeting to approve their accounts. Point number two, this draft legislation is also about the communication and publication of determined periodical reports prepared, for instance, in CCARs, CIFs, RIFs to investors, all of which are also postponed by 3 months. Third and last topic now, the digital attendance to shareholders and board meetings. The Grand Ducal regulation dated March 20 creates new attendance possibilities for shareholders and board meetings of any Luxembourg company. For shareholders meetings, to start with, Luxembourg companies may require, in spite of any contrary provisions of their articles of association, that shareholders participate in the meeting under either remote voting methods or appointment of a single proxy chosen by the company, or by video conference, or any other means allowing the identification of the attendees. On top of this, companies which accounts should have been approved before June 30. For instance, those companies with a financial year closing on October 30, or those companies which articles state that the meeting should be held, for instance, in May or on the first Tuesday of June, can now postpone the deadline of approval of accounts up to June 30. And this even applies to those companies which already had convened their shareholders when the March 20 regulation has been taken. So those companies which already convened their shareholders can reverse the first convening and make a new convening, and now up to June 30. For board meetings now, such meetings can also be held without physical attendance, regardless of any contrary provisions in the Articles of Association. Such meetings can be adopted via either a written circular resolution or via video conference or any other means allowing the identification of the attendees. So that said, the question is whether such a digital attendance raises a substance issue or not. There are two answers to that, the legal and the tax one. So on the legal side, any risk is ruled out because of the exceptional circumstances we're in this March 20 Grand Ducal regulation. Now, the tax answer, and for this, I leave the stand to Mark Schmitz. Mark?
Thank you, Stephen. Indeed, there are important questions that arise from these measures in an international context. For board meetings, we always tell you, make sure that your board members travel to Luxembourg, don't do it by video conference or only by exception, etc. Well, now the video conference would be so the rule for this and the next couple of months. So indeed, the question would be, is there a risk that, for instance, your company could be considered as managed and controlled from abroad if the majority of your board members are non-Luxembourg residents and also attend such a board meeting from abroad. Another question in relation to the explanation given by Sylvie on home working would be whether the daily commuters that come into Luxembourg from Germany, France, and Belgium, whether when they work from home, from their home countries, we heard that personally they should not have a disadvantage from the current crisis measures. But what about corporates? That is really not mentioned, and the question would be, can that create a PE for your company in Belgium, France, or Germany? We believe that all these questions are relevant, are new, and need to be addressed. We think that really they need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. There's no answer that is correct for all, but to the extent that these measures, hopefully, well, they will be temporary, but hopefully also as short as possible, one would hope that they should also, from a corporate perspective, eventually not pose a concern. However, the question and decision is really not so much from a Luxembourg point of view, but from a foreign perspective, whether the other countries could consider that there is a PE in their country, or whether your company is now managed and controlled from their territory. Again, this should be checked in more detail for each specific situation. But again, we would hope that if the measures are temporary, the concern should not be all too high. With that, for those that have not heard yet about our EY stimulus tracker, let me have a quick introduction, because that is really a very nice tool put in place by our national and global organization that would track the COVID measures in roughly all major economies and in more than 30 countries in total, including Luxembourg. This is updated several times a week, available under the link that is shown here, and basically should therefore always be up to date. And if you are in need of knowing which measures are taken in whatever country where that is listed, where you may have operations, you will find it on tracker. And then finally, I had announced in the beginning that you have the possibility to ask questions. I've seen that there has been quite a lively dialogue already in place with a number of questions. In the interest of time, since we covered the 45 minutes that we wanted to cover, my proposal would be that we cover the one or the other question. I think Sylvie had some exchanges here to the benefit of everybody. Let me just start by saying that the question that I saw on the consequence for Luxembourg branches or foreign companies, there it really depends on the measure, but for those measures that are applicable to all taxpayers and for those that pay corporate income tax, I think these measures, like for example, late filing of returns or reduction of cancellation of advance payments, those should be equally applicable to Luxembourg branches or foreign companies. And then, yes, Sylvie, can you, for the benefit of everybody, explain a little bit on the consequences from a personal tax perspective?
Sorry, I did not listen to your question, I must say, so deeply. Mark, would you mind repeating for me?
Yes, you were already discussing, I think, here
yes,
with the participants on questions on Luxembourg branches or foreign companies.
Yes, I was saying that for some of the measures applicable in respect to employees, they may indeed be available also for branches of foreign companies if the conditions are met. Some of these conditions require, for instance, the employees to be subject to the Luxembourg social security system, which is not so often the case because in a branch we may often have employees seconded from abroad, so not subject to the Luxembourg social security system, but we may also have some who are covered by the Luxembourg social security system, and in that case, that branch will also be available, we will be able to get those measures for those employees indeed.
Okay. Thank you, Sylvie. I see that there are plenty of other questions. We'll for sure not have the time to cover those all, but be assured we have well noted them down, and we can go back and get back to you individually over the coming days. I would really like to thank you then all for attending our webcast today. As usual, we will send you the complete slide deck in the coming days, and it will include actually the talk track, so you can look and listen into the slides again. Unfortunately, not like in the office, my invitation today for drinks and lunch will only be virtual. And with that, I can only thank you again and stay healthy and goodbye.